over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Good afternoon, everyone, and as always, welcome back. Will Trump's plan to phase out the Federal Emergency Management Agency, also known as FEMA, after this year's hurricane season, will that add additional burden to states and cripple the federal government's ability to coordinate relief efforts for Americans affected by disasters? Will it? And if so, why? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. Before we get to my guests, let's look at a couple of today's headlines. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu 4 days ago confirmed a military operation against Iran called Rising Lion. Quote, "We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear weaponization program." Well, here's the problem with that statement. Its reference to Iran's nuclear weaponization program flies in direct contradiction to a March report to the U.S. Senate by none other than Tulsi Gabbard, Donald Trump's own national security director. She left no doubt in that testimony about Iran's nuclear program. The country was not building a nuclear weapon. Period. Full stop. She told this to the Senate. And she also said the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, had not reauthorized the program, even though they had enriched uranium to higher levels. And last night, during Trump's flight back to Washington, after he had cut and run from his embarrassment at the G7 meeting, he said, quote, "I don't care what she said," speaking about Trump's own national security advisor. In his view, Iran was, quote, "very close to having a nuclear bomb." Well, Mr. President, based on what evidence? Where is the evidence to contradict your own national security advisor or director? Where's the evidence? That's all I'm asking. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just asking you, if you are going to present this point to the American people as the rationale for ratcheting up the tensions and the conflict in the Middle East, please provide us some evidence, because we've seen this movie before. Where are the weapons of mass destruction that were supposed to be in Iraq? Where are they? What happened to the alleged yellow cake uranium from Niger that Dick Cheney touted as being evidence of our need to go in and remove Saddam Hussein? What happened to the bromance between the sworn arch enemies Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden? Remember Nariya al-Shabaz's testimony before Congress about the alleged atrocities in Kuwait? Quote, "I was the youngest volunteer. Other women were from 20 to 30 years old. While I was there in this hospital in Kuwait, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of incubators, took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor. I was horrified. I could not help but think of my nephew." They were proven, folks, those statements were proven to be lying then. So I ask, where is the evidence now? You ever heard of this term, kleptocracy? You ever heard the term kleptocracy? Well, it's a form of government where those in power, often autocrats, exploit the nation's resources and wealth for personal gain, typically at the expense of the public good. The Senate is expected to pass a cryptocurrency bill without addressing Donald Trump's investments in cryptocurrency. The Senate is expected to approve legislation today that would regulate a form of cryptocurrency known as stable coins. 18 Democratic senators have shown support for the legislation as it has advanced, siding with the Republican majority in a 53-47 Senate passage of the bill. Now, here's the hook. There's a provision in the bill that bans members of Congress and their families from profiting off of stablecoins. Members of Congress and their families cannot engage in trades or business dealings that would enable them to profit from these stablecoins. But that prohibition does not extend to the president and his family, even as Trump builds a crypto empire from the White House. Last month, he hosted a private dinner at his golf club in Virginia with top investors in a Trump-branded meme coin. And his family holds a significant stake in World Liberty Financial, a crypto project that launched his own stablecoin, USD1. He reported earning $57.35 million from token sales at World Liberty Financial in 2024, according to a public financial disclosure that was released last week. A meme coin linked to him has generated an estimated $320 million in fees, though the earnings were split among multiple investors. Those are just a couple of stories that I think are incredibly relevant and incredibly important, and I thought they needed to be brought to your attention. Let me do this. I see we have a technical problem with my guest, so let me ask my producer, text me, should I make the call and see where we are, or do we just proceed without him? Send me a text quickly, please, and let me know what you think I need to do. Or do you want me to text you his number and you can call him? How do you want me to handle that? Sometimes, folks, when you do this live, okay. So, folks, here's what we're gonna do. Bear with us, please. Give me about 60 seconds. Oh, wait a minute. I just got a text message here. I think he's coming back. He says he's in StreamYard. Yeah. So, okay. So do me a favor. We're having a technical problem here. Folks, just bear with me. 60 seconds. I should be able straight. There we go. Quicker than that. There we go. So with all of that now behind us, my guest. So on today's episode, the issue before us is Trump's plan to phase out the FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, after this year's hurricane season. And I believe that this will do nothing but add additional burden to the states, and it'll cripple the federal government's ability to coordinate relief for Americans affected by disasters. Because I think there are two main things you need to understand here, folks. That one, FEMA does a number of things. One, it provides money to states to provide disaster relief to their citizens. It also coordinates relief in a interstate manner, which in many instances is incredibly important as well. My guest is known for his investigative reporting for The Guardian, the BBC television, Rolling Stone, and his string of New York Times bestsellers, including The Best Democracy Money Can Buy and Billionaires and Ballot Bandits. His latest film, Vigilantes Incorporated, America's New Vote Suppression Hitman, is narrated by Rosario Dawson and produced by Martin Sheen and George Caprio. He is none other than, hopefully that didn't just drop, Greg Palast. There we go.
Hey, how you doing, Doctor?
Man, it's good to see you. It's good to see you, brother.
Okay,
welcome back.
As my kids say, I'm kind of a tech tard, so can't be your fault.
So, Greg, before we get to the FEMA story,
yes,
do you know anything about this so-called Genius Act, the bill that would establish guardrails and consumer protections for stable coins? And just let me reiterate, because I know you weren't.
Yes, I was listening in completely. I heard the whole thing, and
ahead.
I know the story well.
Go ahead.
I mean, you're talking. This is the direct violation of the United States Constitution. We have a clause in the United States Constitution called the Emollients Clause, which sounds like something you put in your washing machine.
Correct.
But no, it says you can't, that the president, the vice president, secretary of state cannot put money in their pockets, which comes from foreign sources. And so like Obama, his entire life savings was invested in just government bonds. So he never had a conflict with his job running the government. Trump has gone the opposite way. He's now created something no one has ever done, which is to say, here's a bunch of stuff for you to buy, including this phony Bitcoin business, which doesn't cost him anything. You know, you create a Bitcoin, you make it up. I could have a Greg Palast Fedora Bitcoin, but I'm not president. So, but that's no conflict of interest for me politically. The problem is if you're president of the United States and other nations are basically bribing you through buying your Bitcoins. And if you're wondering if it has an effect, he just had a dinner party where the top 220 investors, investors is a BS term. It's really about literally handing him money. And the top 220 givers, bribers, whatever you want to call them, had a dinner with him. And I do know that one company which said that a Chinese company which said that they bought $20 million in Trump coins, but they still couldn't get in. So imagine the millions of dollars in foreign money that's coming into these Bitcoins. And it's so corrupt that even our corrupt United States Senate has now, they're looking at a bill which would prevent any politician from having a so-called meme coin, stable coin, because it's just literally a way to be bribed both by U.S. operators and foreign operators. It's literally legalized bribery. So they want to stop it. But interestingly, as you said, Doctor, they're not including the president. They're not including the vice president because those guys are just lining their pockets. And you know what? It's more than corruption. This guy is stabbing America's economy in the heart with his tariffs. And now he's basically selling these foreign governments access to him to cut their special tariff deals. He's basically selling our laws, selling our governments, selling our policy. I've never seen anything like this in my career.
And I think it's important for people to understand that not only are you a phenomenal investigative journalist, but you also have a degree in finance from the University of Chicago. You studied under Milton Friedman. So I think that's an important point for people to understand, that you're looking at this not only as a journalist, you're looking at this as a guy that's highly trained in economics and finance from one of the top schools in the country, if not the world.
Yes, well, and this is serious stuff, because when you have people, there's no such thing as creating wealth. Remember when Mitt Romney used to talk about, I'm a wealth creator, not Obama? In other words, he created Staples and put all those mom and pop stationery stores out of business. You don't create wealth. All wealth, according to John Locke, who was a father of capitalism, all wealth comes from what workers produce. There isn't any value except what people produce. And when we talk about arbitrageurs and crypto billionaires, we're talking about people who haven't created anything. But their wealth comes from something, and it comes from us. There's no such thing as, there's no alchemy. There's no magic Merlin that creates wealth. You and I create wealth by going to work and creating products and services.
And so then the issue there then becomes, what percentage of the creation of wealth from labor does labor actually realize, as opposed to the owners of the mechanisms of production? That's where the struggle is, not in, as you just talked about, this fiction. In fact, the show is called Connecting the Dots. So what we're looking at in the United States, as it relates to the basis of the United States economy, it has moved from a labor-based manufacturing economy to a financialized economy, which means it's to a great degree based on smoke and mirrors, the manipulation of money, not the creation of wealth.
Yes, actually, it's funny. My first book I wrote, oh my God, almost 50 years ago, called The World is a Company Town. And I first brought out this idea, having worked with these right-wing guys, that the world is heading away from manufacturing as a source of profits to simply people skimming off the money through financial manipulations.
Okay.
And I was working with the first people out of Goldman Sachs. By the way, I turned down a job offer from them. I'd be pretty well off today if I hadn't done that. I wouldn't like myself, but it's about money making money. And that's dangerous in an economy. Aristotle, the guy who literally invented the field of economics, said there's nothing more dangerous than people who are making money off of money, as opposed to making money off an investment, making money off their labor, making money off their ideas. They're making money off money. And there couldn't be anything more dangerous to our economy. And this is a huge problem at this moment. And, look, Trump says he's trying to save manufacturing. Really? I can tell you this. My son, because of AI, lost his job as a programmer. But so I said, you have nothing to worry about, because with Trump, you can just go down to a parking lot at Home Depot and get a job pouring cement or landscaping. So what are you complaining about? Well, that's what I'm saying. What Trump's tariffs are doing and his immigration sweeps are doing is is saying what we want our citizens to do is stand in a Home Depot parking lot. We want to be sewing those Nike sneakers. And Lutnick, our Berserko, our Berserko Treasury Secretary says, "Oh, you know all those little jobs? You see those photos of the Chinese putting tiny screws in the iPhones? Well, we're going to bring those jobs back." Well, I'm sorry, my kid has a bachelor's degree, which is pretty damn expensive. And no, I didn't put up that money so you can put little screws in iPhones. And what we're giving up, doctor, the minute we put tariffs on Chinese junk, which we don't want those jobs back, but what China did was cancel all our Boeing airplane orders. Now, the average Boeing worker earns about $40 an hour. And we're giving those jobs up to get jobs sewing sneakers. And in China, Nike pays about $3.30 an hour. I looked it up. So we're giving up the airline engineering jobs in return for sewing sneakers. You like that? And why is that? Because Trump and his Bitcoins and his games and his free goodies from Qatar, it's a grift. And we're paying the price. It's a grift, and we're paying the price.
And final point on this, and then we'll move on to FEMA.
Okay.
China doesn't even want these jobs anymore. China, folks need to realize that in terms of economic development, in terms of what, for lack of the understood, the universal term, third world countries, there's a hierarchy of jobs that get that gets sent overseas, and those jobs about screwing those tiny screws into things, and those menial replicative types of jobs, those are the kinds of jobs you use to start your economy. But after your economy has developed to a certain point, you don't want those jobs anymore, and you then export those jobs to another country. So China is sending those jobs to other countries that see that as a way to jumpstart their economies the same way China did. Greg Palast.
In fact, I don't think many people realize that our fourth biggest trading partner at this is Vietnam, because all these jobs, from putting little screws into the iPhones and sewing Nike sneakers, are moving from China to Vietnam. As you said, China's like done with it. China's making quantum computers. China is the biggest producer of high quality electric cars that leave Tesla in the dust. And that's what they're doing while we're trying to figure out how to get the sneaker sewing jobs back. And you would say, anyone looking at this from outer space would say, what happened to the United States? Wasn't that the leading economy in the world? Why are they giving up high tech in return for sewing sneakers? And so a space alien would say, what the heck's going on? And here's the answer, doctor. It's not that Trump is stupid. He's greedy. He's pulling in hundreds of millions of dollars into his pocket, and he's selling tariff indulgences. You watch that. Watch what's happening with the tariffs. You give Trump a, quote, gift, and your tariffs go down. This is really dangerous stuff. Not that he's all that bright. In fact, as it turns out, yesterday, he signed a pact. He said that he signed 200 trade pacts. Well, there's only about 190 nations in the world. So he signed a pact with one nation at least twice. So he said he signed 200 pacts. And when someone said, well, name 5, and he couldn't. He says he has one single pact signed, one with England. And yesterday he formally signed the pact, a big piece of paper, which he then dropped on the ground, which he couldn't pick up because he can't see below his stomach. And he had signed the pact with the United Kingdom, with England. And he said, oh, now we've signed a pact with the European Union. Well, guess what? Britain hasn't been in the European Union for 5 years. So he doesn't even know who he's signing a pact with. And it would be funny, except you and I, doctor, you and I and the public and the taxpayers and people whose jobs are in the line are getting kicked in the teeth by this greed, stupidity complex.
Maybe he signed the pact with I think it's called the Kangaroo Islands off the coast of Australia that only is inhabited by penguins. I know I said this was a final point, but you just made a point that makes this the final point.
Okay.
We've heard about the bromance between Trump and Musk, and now Trump is done with Musk. If Donald Trump was really, really as angry at Musk as he thought, he would lower or eliminate the tariff on Chinese electric vehicles.
Yes.
And that would send Tesla into the toilet.
Well, in fact, if you go to gregpalast.com, where you get my film Vigilantes Inc., you can get my stuff, but you can also get my story, Elon Musk, Welfare Queen.
Mm-hmm.
This guy has, he's not a great inventor. He didn't invent the Tesla. He bought the company. He'd already made the car. He's not an inventor, but he's a good huckster getting government money.
Mm-hmm.
He built the first Tesla assembly operation by getting $500 million from the state of California and the Department of Energy. He doesn't want government in his business, but all the money to build the first thousands of Teslas came from you and me. And then he gets subsidies, $7,500 from the government, $4,500 state of California, special lanes, all kinds of goodies, which are promoting, and in fact, law in California, which required people to buy electric vehicles. But then you said the big one. The fact is that we have 100, even today, after all this discussion,
mm-hmm.
it's over 100% tariff, about 140% tariff on Chinese electric cars, and they are better than Teslas. And you can buy a Chinese sedan for $20,000, fully electric, 0 to 60 in a flash, high quality. But we're not allowed to have those because Trump has got to protect Tesla. Because the minute you drop those tariffs on electric vehicles, everyone's going to buy a Tesla because you won't have to buy. It'll be cheaper than a combustion car, and you won't have to put any gas in it. So who wouldn't buy it? And the answer is because Elon would collapse. He'd be sitting in a cardboard box out on Alvarado Street if you drop those tariffs.
He'd be at a Home Depot parking lot looking for a job. That's where he'd be. All right. That's okay. So, and again, we could do a whole hour on that, but let us now. Trump's plan to begin, as he calls it, phasing out the federal agency that responds to disasters, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, after this current 2025 hurricane season, and saying that he's going to pass the responsibility down to the states, but that's not as simple as stated. Quote, we want to wean off of FEMA and we want to bring it down to the state level, end quote. Trump said this in the Oval Office as they were talking about preparing for summer wildfires. And it's also important to note here, and then I'll come to you, Greg, that Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has said that she is in line with, in agreement with eliminating FEMA, which she should know better because isn't she the former governor of where? Former governor of
North Dakota.
North Dakota. There we go. So she's a governor. Former governor. So she should know better. Greg Palast.
Oh boy. Okay. I've been investigating and covering FEMA and emergency management since Katrina, because I worked with the city of New Orleans and I did an investigation for BBC Television Democracy Now! And look, FEMA has been a disastrous agency, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. That's the people, if you have a wildfire, if you have a hurricane, if you have a flood, if you have a dam burst. Remember, no one wants government until something goes wrong. They say, where's the government? Well, wait, didn't you guys say we don't need the government? So what happened under Bush in Katrina is I went down to New Orleans where I worked for the city government. I investigated, and the emergency plan was privatized. George Bush had one of his cronies draw up the plan in a multi-million-dollar contract. And guess what they forgot? The entire plan was based on get in your car and run if there's a hurricane. Well, guess what? About a fourth of the people in New Orleans had no cars. And there was a system where they're supposed to bring in buses. But of course, if there's a flood, you can't get into the city. So the people without cars were literally left to drown. And this is, if you think that's a one-off thing, that was from privatization of FEMA, and that's what Trump wants to do. He wants to take the Bush plan, which ended up with over 3,000 people drowned dead, and he wants to make that national. So we'll all be Katrina. Thank you so much, Mr. Trump. And why, you know his buddies are in on this one, including Palantir, big funders of his operation, getting all the information. But here's the deal. He's saying we're going to pass it to the state. Well, guess what, Mr. Trump? You can't just pass emergency planning to the state. It costs money. You have to pass the money, and they're cutting out all the money. Now, I want to tell you, Doctor, I just spoke with the village town president of a little town west of Chicago. It's called Villa Park. I talked to the town board president, and he is scared. Now, this is a town. This is like, something out of a Norman Rockwell painting, mostly white, little cutesy shops, nice little white, little rural town. And he is scared. He says, because look, Chicago, he's near Chicago. Well, like take where I live. By the way, I lost my office, burnt down in Malibu. And we'll rebuild in Malibu and in Los Angeles because we have $1 trillion tax base. But what does Little Villa Park do? He says if we have an emergency, we have rail lines running through. We just had in the other towns where we've had toxic rail car derailments. What do we do? Where do the people go? FEMA's supposed to provide tents. FEMA's supposed to provide emergency evacuation. But no. So what's happening is he's scared, because I can tell you right now, and here's why he's personally scared. He said he was a career Marine. He was assigned to the emergency evacuation in New Orleans. And he said by the time the Marines got there to help people, they were floating face down. He said his whole life has been haunted by the horrible scenes where he pulled dead pregnant women out of the water. He pulled kids out of the water, their bodies. And he says, I don't want that to happen in my town, but what am I going to do if there's no FEMA? We have a rail car derailment, toxic derailment. Exactly what can I do? Who do I call? We don't have the money. I worked on emergency evacuation for Long Island, New York, which is Suffolk County is the richest county in the United States of America. And I know that our evacuation plan for a hurricane cost $20 million. If you don't have FEMA, these little towns, they're so big on hometown America, the little villages. Well, they're all going to drown. They're all going to burn. They're all going to suck poison gases unless they wake up and realize, baby, they're not just going after so-called urban communities, which is just the
euphemism,
the dog whistle for black communities. They're coming for you, because I'm going to tell you, we in the big cities, we got the money. We'll take care of ourselves, but you are going to drown.
Two things. Because I have my mother's from New Orleans. My father was from a small town called Donaldsonville, Louisiana. So I have a lot of family there. And I had family in the Superdome, not Superdome. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I had relatives in the Superdome, and a lot of people watching this on television were asking the question, why were those people there? Why didn't they leave? And to your point, a quarter of them didn't have cars. And I want to say Katrina hit on a Wednesday or a Thursday. I can't remember. It was a Wednesday or a Thursday. A lot of those folks were waiting until Friday to cash their paychecks. These are people that are living paycheck to paycheck, and they could not just, oh my God, a hurricane's coming, let's get in the car and hit I-70 or whatever.
Right.
They didn't have a car, and if they had a car, they didn't have the money to put gas in the car because they didn't get paid till Friday.
Well, and you weren't going to get out anyway. It was horrendous. I was looking at the photo. Remember, I told you I worked on emergency evacuation in Long Island, New York. I'm looking at the pictures of New Orleans, and they're supposed to go out, and then they have near the Superdome, they have this huge 10-lane highway, and it's a parking lot leaving the city, and the other lanes are dead empty. Well, I can tell you, if you had an emergency evacuation plan, 8 of those 10 lanes would have been reversed to leave the city.
Sure.
So they didn't help people leave the city. And then the people that didn't have cars, it was tough luck. It was like, now I can tell you, if you watch, now I have a film, Big Easy to Big Empty, where I did this investigation for Democracy Now. Go to gregpalast.com or go to YouTube and just look for Big Easy to Big Empty, Big Easy to Big Empty, or Greg Palast on New Orleans. And you'll get a half-hour film showing you the horror show of what they did. And that's when FEMA was supposedly functioning. I mean, they threw all these people from the 9th Ward into and all over New Orleans into these FEMA trailers right under the smokestacks at the Exxon refinery. No human being is supposed to be sucking this stuff in. This is the type of thing that was done. But now without FEMA, there's no trailers. There's no nothing. There's no way out. Literally, you are going to be left to burn or drown or suck toxic fumes unless this is changed. And like I say, they're just not going after the urban people. They're going after all of America. And then they'll somehow figure out how to blame it on Biden. Right? Or Obama.
You're absolutely right. And the brownie, see, part of the problem, I see it. Part of the problem with FEMA is that it has become a nesting place for political benefactors. Because I'm forgetting Brownie's first name, but he had
no one remembers.
The director of FEMA had no emergency management background, but he had been a contributor to the Bush administration, good friend of George Bush's, and George Bush needed to give his buddy a job. And so FEMA is where he put his buddy, who had no emergency management experience at all. Norm Clement, thank you very much. Wow, Norm. Thank you, brother Norm. Thank you for that $49 super sticker. Hakeem Mohammed, thank you very much for that $5. Thank you all very much for supporting the effort. So FEMA, to your point about being historically mismanaged, some of it had to do with the political scheme that it became as a place. Let me just send this benefactor to FEMA and give him or her a federal job. And you mentioned the FEMA trailers, and you were talking about where those FEMA trailers were placed in Cancer Alley, sucking toxic air. But it's also important to know that a lot of the glue that was used in the paneling of those trailers was formaldehyde based. So they're living in a trailer that is toxic in and of itself. Greg Palast.
Well, if you think that Brownie and
right?
the Bush was bad, you're more than right. Okay. But it's far worse. I hate to tell you. David Richardson is a Trump's appointee to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and he actually told his staff, this is no joke, that he didn't realize there was a hurricane season. He didn't know that there was a hurricane season, which, it's like basically June to November. That's when we have our hurricanes. That's when Katrina happened in August. So, but this guy literally didn't. Now, I'm not a weatherman, but I certainly know when the wind blows. And so he's supposed to save us from hurricanes, and he doesn't even know when the hurricane season is. There was no plan. And then what he said, well, let's just use the plan from last year. And guess what, Richardson? Trump has cut your budget. 2,000 people have left FEMA. 2,000 people took the early out. So now you don't have those people. In fact, they have no one. They cut out all the money for the program that goes door to door to warn people. We used to have a program that if you're not listening to the radio or TV, especially in low income areas, that they sent out people to knock on your door saying hurricanes coming, get the heck out. And he said, well, we'll just use that plan. And he said, but you defunded the whole program. You defunded it. How do we do the same program when we don't have the money and we don't have the people? The answer is, once again, so Trump's guy, so you're talking about the combination of ignorance and greed. And how does greed come into it? How did this guy get this job? You think he gave nothing? It's all underhanded. This is basically the worst of policy for pay. It's really ugly. And putting these characters in, and you know what they do, Doctor? They screw up the agencies, just like Bush did with FEMA. They make them so dysfunctional that people say, the hell with it, just shut them down.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? Well, you may not like and by the way, I want to say that Obama and Biden actually rebuilt the agency with professionals. In fact, until Trump came in, I can tell you right now, because I investigate this stuff, it was considered one of the most, one of the best federal agencies. It was actually had been rebuilt by Biden, so it was actually functional. And now Trump has put this guy in who I don't even know if he knows what a hurricane is, let alone when it happens. Good luck.
We have a tendency, and first of all, I can you give me any more time when we get to the top? Okay.
Yes, just a little bit, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we have a tendency to look at this in a very isolated stovepipe or vertical manner. You're talking about a catastrophe hitting a state. But even if you just look at it in terms of a singular state, look at North Carolina, for example, and a year ago. It happened at the end of the Biden administration. You still need coordination, and heaven forbid that catastrophe is interstate, that it involves multiple states. Now you're going to need coordination between states so that you can have an efficient and effective response to the disaster. How in the world where do they expect this money that they're going to send? Where's this money going to come from?
Well, that's what this small town basically is, a mayor of a small town.
Mm-hmm.
He says, because he went through the Katrina evacuation,
Mm-hmm.
just seeing he said there's no one to evacuate, just dead bodies.
Right.
And he said, what happens to my town? We don't have that money.
Right.
We just don't have that money. We don't know. And we don't have the expertise for them to each little town in America to hire their own experts. It's crazy. Also, by the way, hurricanes don't necessarily look at borders. So
Nope.
If you have a Florida evacuation plan and you have a Carolina or Georgia evacuation plan, wait, which, what are we doing? Where are we, who's going to coordinate this? And I found out, like, even in Katrina, when I was working in Long Island, this very wealthy area of America, and we made sure that every fire department, every hospital, every school had a copy of the evacuation plan and knew what their plans were. That never happened in New Orleans. There was a plan, but no one knew where it was. I guess it was wet. But now there literally will be no plan. I mean, like I say, they're kind of doing a bit of a leftover of last year's plan, but they literally don't have the staffing or the ability to carry it out. And they have no new plan because, hey, they don't know when hurricane season is. Guess what? It's right now.
Monroe Abrams says the 9th Ward still isn't restored fully. You're right. I was down in the 9th a couple years ago got some phenomenal footage of the devastation. It was a ghost town, just a straight up ghost town, and it hasn't recovered. It hasn't recovered fully. And Norm Clement, thank you. Folks, you need to go to you'rewithinthenorms.com. Go to you'rewithinthenorms.com for information regarding what's happening with pharmaceutical companies, what's happening with medical issues. Go to you'rewithinthenorms.com. So let us move from FEMA to Trump's deployment of the California National Guard in LA, because that's returning to the federal courts today. The Ninth Circuit of Appeals last Thursday temporarily blocked a lower court order that directed Trump to return control of the National Guard to the California governor, Gavin Newsom, after he deployed them following the raids in LA. So now that determination by the court is now being heard in an appellate court in California, and you are, Greg, in California. That's so right. Tell us what's happening.
I'm in Los Angeles, and you can see the flames coming up. Actually, no, you don't. You see really beautiful weather. A little smoggy today, but I don't think it's from the flames. This is, I'm laughing about it. But this is no joke. It's not just that he sent in the National Guard. And this is what Americans have to be concerned about. On a day in which he has a little, peon to dictatorship parade in Washington, we had Marines in the streets of Los Angeles. Now, they didn't know what they were doing. Most of them were just hanging out at 7-Elevens or sleeping on the floor in some schools. But there's no riots here. Yeah, some idiots put some Waymo cars, lit them up, which is stupid. And some guys running around throwing some rocks through some Starbucks windows or something. But you know what? These are police matters, and we have a huge trained police force for this. And by the way, most of it wasn't in Los Angeles, but the towns nearby. But the danger, what Trump was doing in sending in the Marines. And the judge said he can't take on the issue of Marines because when the suit came to him, the Marines weren't in the streets yet. This is a direct violation of a foundational law from our founding fathers, the Posse Comitatus Act, which says you cannot use American troops against Americans on American soil. That's the core of protecting our democracy. That's why we don't have a political dictatorship. That's why we don't have martial law. But now this guy has taken this basic freedom and safety that we don't have to fear our own army. And he sends troops into the street. They're not trained for police work. They're trained to destroy things. We want them to destroy things. And that's why we don't want them on American streets. That's why it's against the Constitution. We can have no standing army, by the way, in the United States, believe it or not, because there was a fear of the founding fathers that a standing army on U.S. soil could lead to a military dictatorship. And in case we're missing the point, while he sent in the troops in violation of the Constitution and the law into Los Angeles, he's having his little birthday parade with tanks ripping up the streets of Washington. And as his own Joint Chiefs of Staff, leader of our military, General Milley, told him, we don't do this in America. That's for dictators. And the reason is, when dictators have these big parades, they're not trying to impress their foreign enemies. They're trying to say,
exactly,
this is what we're going to do to you.
Exactly.
Those parades are to frighten their own citizens. Exactly. And if you think that Trump wants us to miss that message, then why did he put Marines in the streets of Los Angeles? This is absolutely nuts. I just, like I said, I live here. I just went out to dinner last night. It's like, where are these flames? Where are these roving maniacs? Like I said, there's a couple nuts, which is a shame. But we had hundreds of thousands of people in the street just in Los Angeles, in every major city, to say, no, we don't have kings here. No royalty, no martial law, no big men with big tanks and little wieners. Sorry to be very obvious about it. We know what it's about.
We've got some video, and as they say in the Bush's baked bean commercial, roll that beautiful bean footage. Okay, I think you get the sense.
Yeah.
Is that you got a bunch of angry people in the street, and what escalates the situation are the Marines or the National Guard. Donald Trump from what I saw last week on Sunday, the protests were breaking up. And then when the protesters heard that the National Guard was coming, that escalated, that inflamed the entire situation.
Yeah, I mean, it was look. There's always some berserkers. They're going to throw a rock or they're going to burn a car or something. But we had we're talking. I think it was NPR that estimated that there were 5 million people in the streets on
this past weekend.
This past weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And the No Kings protest, 5 million. And you had to look far and wide to find even a little bit of disruption or mayhem. But that's what they're looking for. They're hoping to provoke it. They're trying to provoke it. And I'm not a conspiracy guy, but I got to tell you, who paid some of those guys to create those photo ops for Fox News? I mean, some of it was so ridiculous and silly that, there was no danger of life and limb. But think about this: on January 6th of 2021, you had 1,500 people invade the U.S. Congress for Donald Trump, and you had something like 4 people died, including like 3 cops died, and they were given pardons. So you don't think that message is getting across? That go ahead, shoot to kill, and you got a pardon at the other end. This is very, very, very dangerous stuff. This is dangerous stuff, Doctor.
Senator Alex Padilla, and we saw the footage of him being just totally abused by the National Guard and the FBI. He spoke today on the floor of the Senate, and he was very, very clear about what actually happened and why, how he had been escorted by the FBI and the National Guard into the meeting. They knew who he was when they met him at the door of the federal building. So it wasn't as though, contrary to what Kristi Noem says, he stormed through. They opened the door for him and allowed him into the room. And it wasn't until she said, quote, "We are here to liberate citizens of California from the tyranny of their elected officials," is when he said, "Wait a minute, I have a question."
Yeah, that's all he said. I watched the video. He said he's a United States senator at a press conference being held by a member of the cabinet who is not elected. And he's a United States senator, and she's saying she's liberating me. I'm a Californian. I'm sitting here right now, or as we call it, the occupied territories. So my senator is just saying, wait a minute, I have a question. And with that, he's manhandled, he's seized, he's thrown to the floor, he's handcuffed. This is a United States senator asking a question. And by the way, even if he were just a United States janitor, the idea that you would raise your hand at a press conference where you're supposed to be allowed to ask questions, you raise your hand and say, I have a question, and you get thrown to the ground and handcuffed. I mean, yes, it's particularly terrible that he's a United States senator. And I hate to say this, he's clearly Hispanic
Mhm.
Do you really think they would have done that to a white senator? Come
Lindsey
on.
Graham. Would they have done that to Lindsey Graham?
I would like to do that. Well, Lindsey, well, I won't say it.
Yeah, right. I thought exactly the same thing,
I
Greg.
have to stop
It said
myself.
he
I have to
probably
stop
wants to be
myself.
manhandled,
Yeah,
but we won't have
we have
that
to get away from
conversation.
that one.
But because it's also important to know, and he made this point in the Senate today. I was there doing my job
Yeah.
as a United States senator. Oversight is my job. Check and balance is my job.
Well, you know what?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Protesting in the street is our job.
Ours, our job.
We're American citizens. We're supposedly in our democracy, we're the bosses. We have a right to make our statements, protest, raise questions. In fact, it says petition our government. That literally means the
Or
right to
redress
ask a
of
question.
grievances.
Right. So he literally has that legal right as not just as a U.S. senator, but as an American. It's the first darn thing in our Bill of Rights, and that's what they want to take away from us. This is really dangerous stuff, and I'm telling you because I'm watching this. You know, I know what they're doing in Los Angeles. They're provoking this situation so that they can go out to the country as they did after the George Floyd demonstrations and say, "Oh, these are all rioters. You know, scary, dark people are coming to take your jobs and burn your houses down." Okay, this is the beginning of fascism, because what you do is you find those people to blame. So when things go wrong, it's not me. You know what? Let's not forget. We're talking about the distractor in chief before the so-called riots in Los Angeles, which, okay, they go out there. You know, I'm very suspicious of the fact that those protesters, like the head of the Service Employees Union, that they knew everything before the ICE guys even touched down. So clearly they were letting the word out so that there'd be provocation and confrontation. That's what they want. And so what happened is now you've got the other. We're getting those dark people. They're crawling across the border. And then you see these people in Los Angeles, the urban people. You know, urban is code word for black, urban uprising, etc. And this is to, once again, because we were talking before about Elon Musk, the destruction of our budgets. We were talking about tariffs, which were destroying our economy. We were talking about the fact that Trump said he was going to solve the war in Ukraine and bring back the hostages in Israel and all that stuff. And in 24 hours, well, it's been more than 24 hours. So we're going to forget about that. And the price of eggs, we've had massive inflation extended because of the tariffs. And in Bobby Kennedy and Health and Human Services made it worse because they've stopped sending out notices when flocks of hens have the bird flu, and that means that we will never have eggs under $9 a dozen. I can tell you, I just went to Trader Joe's, and it's just absolutely insane. And so it's all distraction, and we have to also be very careful because, you know, knowing I'm quite close to the King family, and I got to tell you, the one warning is always nonviolence. And yeah, burning a Waymo car with no one in it, no one's hurt. But guys, be very careful. Do not give these jerks their photo op. 5 million people in the street, and they're going to keep showing the same 3 photos.
And they didn't show the mariachi bands that were in the street. They didn't show the dancers, the Mexican and Latino dancers that were in the street dancing to the mariachi music. You know, those volatile mariachis, man, that's a gang you do not want to cross, because if they start strumming those guitars too loud, oh my God, who knows what can happen.
I know, doctor. This is like, and I saw this in Chicago, but yes, so we can't count on the media to be our friends, especially because they're scared to death of Trump right now. They are scared to death of him because he controls their licenses and everything else. and media is grabbing its ankle, and it's sickening. So that's why we need Dr. Wilmer Leon. And you haven't asked me to do this, but I'm going to say it right now. If you haven't donated to keep this wonderful program on air, this is what you got to do now. This is your job. We need our media. And no, it won't be. The only way we're going to have freedom of the press is if you pay a bit, because there's no freedom for free.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And no, that was an unsolicited.
Definitely unsolicited.
That was final point, and I know your schedule.
Yeah, I gotta get going.
The issue regarding voter suppression. What should people be paying attention to as we get closer to 2026?
Okay, so this is the year of the big purge. What that means that in 2023, I calculated that there were 4.7 million people purged from the voter rolls on no good evidence. I did an investigation for NAACP, Reverend Jackson Rainbow Push, and for the ACLU, and I did Black Voters Matter. So I did a couple of reports investigating these purges. These lists are 66% wrong. Now, what does that mean? And it's almost all people of color. What that means is that we had over 2.5 million voters, legal voters, mostly voters of color, who were denied the right to vote in 2024. And you want to know why Donald Trump won? That's what it is. It's called vote suppression. It's called Jim Crow. Forget about spiders from Starlink that invaded the voting machines. This is Jim Crow. They're taking people off the voter rolls. And what you can do now, two things. Check your registration. I don't care if you've been voting the same place for 50 years. You'll see, if you go to and watch my film, which is free now on YouTube, Vigilantes Inc., America's New Vote Suppression Hitmen. Vigilantes Inc. It's on YouTube. Palast, Vigilantes Inc. I want you to watch that, because you're going to meet Christine Jordan, Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin, voting at the same voting station in Atlanta for 50 years. I'm there when she's thrown out of the station. They purged her from the voter rolls, supposedly on grounds she didn't live in Atlanta anymore. She lived down the street. I went to her house. And if they can knock off Martin Luther King's cousin after 50 years on the voter rolls, they can go after you. So check your voter registration. If you're missing or the information is wrong, every state now allows you to re-register online. You do that, and make sure everyone you know checks their registration. So it's not good enough to say, oh, I just registered. No, you better go online and make sure that your name was added, especially if you're a student. In places like Georgia, it might take 8 months for your name to get on the voter rolls. So please make sure that you check your registration. And when you go to vote, 20 states now allow you to register on election day. Bring your voter ID, bring your ID, picture ID, and bring your like an electric bill or gas bill with your address. I know this seems ridiculous if you've been voting at the same place for years. I'm sorry, man. They're going after you.
As we wrap this up, Cherie asks, did you ever meet Studs Terkel, Greg?
Yes, and that was one of the great pleasures, because I lived in Chicago. A truly great journalist, a truly great soulful person. And I worked with the labor unions in Chicago for many years, and Studs was always there. What a great, wonderful guy.
And I was blessed. I interviewed him for an hour on my Inside the Issue show a couple months before he died. I had an hour with him on the show. So Cherie, not only did Greg meet him, I got a great opportunity to interview him. Wow. And Rampleson says that I've been following Mr. Palast for 25 years now. He's great. Yes, he is. And if I can pat myself on the back, I was one of the first, I know, in radio to have you on when you were still in London.
I was in London
with the Guardian.
Yes, I was with the Guardian and BBC, right. And you called me in London and said, because I had the information that how exactly Bush beat Gore by removing tens of thousands of black men from the voter rolls, saying they were felons. Their only crime was voting while black. And that's when my own eyes are opened up to this issue of racial vote suppression. But it wasn't an issue that any of my colleagues in journalism were taking a look at. You know, we'd always just said, oh, American elections, we're the land of the free and we count all the votes. And no, we don't. So that's an
'Cause
issue.
you
Look,
you
we have
took
to
that
keep
story to
fighting.
ABC. You took it to ABC,
Yes, well,
NBC. They didn't want to touch it.
Yes, ABC television would not, even though they were the partners to BBC, they wouldn't touch it. The Washington Post wouldn't touch it, even though they are our guardian partners. And so we really, I had a fight to get this into the U.S. press. It was not easy. We had Paul Krugman at the New York Times help me out, and Bob Herbert, who African-American columnist formerly with the Times. If it weren't for them, my work would have never made it to the U.S. in the mainstream. And you were the first radio voice for me to bring this story to America.
Greg Palast, thank you, man. I know you got to go. Really appreciate it. Glad we've gotten some of these details worked out, and we'll be doing this much more going forward. Thanks, Greg.
Okay, see you at gregpalast.com. You're the best, doctor. Bye.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate that. All right, folks. This is some foolishness. In fact, not only did Kristi Noem, and now she's the head of what I can't now. I'm drawing a blank on the name of the darn agency, because it's not FEMA. Give me 1 second here. Oh, we're already up there. Give me 1 second here, because I want to get the name of this right. Homeland Security. There we go. I couldn't. She's the head of Homeland Security, and she can't keep track of her own damn purse in a restaurant in the homeland. Now, look at the irony of that. Homeland Security and Homegirl can't keep track of her own purse in a restaurant. She has no business being there. And one of the other things that she said during her press conference, where Senator Alex Padilla was thrown out of, one of the other things she said was that, I think she said this, she didn't say it during the press conference, she said it shortly thereafter. What they're doing in Los Angeles with a Democratic governor, they are going to replicate in other American states. Thank you, Mark Coley, for that $10 super sticker. They're going to replicate this in other states governed by Democrats. I'm going to repeat that, because this is what Kristi Noem, the director of Homeland Security, has told us. The Trump administration, are going to replicate what they're doing in Los Angeles. They're going to replicate that in other democratically controlled states. This has nothing to do with Homeland Security. This has nothing to do with immigration. It has everything. Thank you, Norm. It has great show. Thank you, Norm. It has everything to do with political posturing and optics. That's all this is. That's all this is political posturing and optics. Remember last Monday, I made a plea to those protesting in Los Angeles. I said, folks, please go home. Do not give them the optics that they're looking for. Remember, I said that. Greg just said the same thing, and he and I hadn't talked about that. That's unsolicited. And thank you again, Greg, for that unsolicited endorsement of the show. This has nothing to do with protecting the homeland. Again, they put a woman in that can't even keep track of her own damn purse, and she's in charge of Homeland Security. That's similar. They put her in charge of Homeland Security and she has zero background in this area. The same way, I think his name is Michael Brown. Somebody sent me responded to my question. Let me see if I can give them. I think it's Michael Brown, and somebody sent it to me. They put him in charge of Homeland Security. George Bush did. I'm sorry, FEMA. They put him in charge of FEMA. Again, zero experience in the area. And folks, these are not, remember General Honore? That brother is an expert in federal emergency management. General Honore, remember him from Louisiana? He is an expert in Homeland Security. He is an expert in federal emergency management response. These departments, as I said earlier, have become holding places to demonstrate political gratitude. You know, Michael Brown, I know, Brownie, I know you don't have a clue. You can't even spell FEMA. Brownie, I know you can't spell FEMA, but I'm going to put you in charge of FEMA because I appreciate your support on the campaign trail. I appreciate your helping with the contributions to the campaign. So, Brownie, you can't spell FEMA, but I'm going to put you in charge of it. Same thing with Kristi Noem. She don't know squat about squat. But now she's the head of, what I say she was the head of? You know what I said she was the head of. The grift is on. The grift is strong. The problem is the grifter in chief is hustling backwards. Look that one up, folks, if you ain't been on the corner long. He's hustling backwards. And the Senate, in passing this crypto bill, is giving him carte blanche to do so. And so you've got to ask yourself the question, to what end? And who are the Democrats that back this BS? Because once again, the Democrats are conspicuously complicit in the grift. Final point. You saw all of these folks. In fact, hold on one second. Let me take a swig of water here. Melody always gets on me for not drinking enough water. As you looked at this so-called parade that Donald Trump had, and again, folks, Saturday was my birthday, and I thought that the parade was going to be in my honor, and you know, Donald Trump lies again. But anyway, so you look at the No Kings parade. You look at the No Kings protests that took place all across the country. And to her credit, last night on her show, Rachel Maddow showed footage from all over the country. She spent an inordinate amount of time on showing footage of the volumes of people that from all over the country. I mean, from Los Angeles to Fresno, California. I mean, just big and small. And you also then look at the most recent job approval ratings of Donald Trump, and now he's upside down in the numbers. He's losing on numerous fronts. And the assumption would be that all of those people in the street at the No Kings marches would vote for whoever the Democratic nominee will be, whether it's House of Representatives, Senate, the presidency, governors. The assumption would be, and this I believe is a horrific assumption being made by a number of Democrats, that all of those folks in the street will, when given the opportunity to vote, turn out to vote for a Democrat. To which I say, and I'm going to use a very complex political science term, so if you all want to write this down, get your pencils and write this down and then look it up. To which I will say, nay, nay. Ain't necessarily so, as Sport and Life said in Porgy and Bess. Ain't necessarily so. You cannot assume, or let me put it another way. If you assume that the election's in the bag, if you look at the protests in the street that took place this past weekend and are continuing as we speak, if you assume that those people in the street will vote for the Democratic candidate, you are, if you assume, you're doing what? Making an ass out of you and me. Because there's no direct correlation between those protesters and their party affiliation and whether they will vote in line with a party affiliation if they are, in fact, registered voters. If the Democrats make that assumption, they are making the same mistake they made in 24 with Kamala Harris. They are assuming that because Donald Trump is a convicted felon 36 times, because Donald Trump is the despicable human being that he is, because Donald Trump is a grifter, they made the assumption that just by continuing to beat that drum, to continue to beat the anti-MAGA drum, and not offer the American electorate anything substantive to vote for, folks, you're going to get the same result. The definition of insanity or the definition of stupidity is engaging in the same behavior, but expecting a different result. Ain't gonna work. That's why, as I look at again, I'm on the East Coast, and so I'm in the DMV, so I'm seeing political ads from Maryland, I'm seeing political ads from Virginia, and as I'm looking at ads for the Democrats that are running for lieutenant governor, the Democrats that are running for Secretary of State, I'm looking at the in the state of Virginia, in the state of Maryland, as I'm looking at the political ads for Democrats that are running for attorney general in those respective states. And then I was also in New York this past weekend and saw similar ads from Democrats. They're running against MAGA. They're running against Donald Trump. But last I checked, Donald Trump in the state elections in New York isn't on the ballot. When I checked in Virginia, in the state election of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Donald Trump's name isn't on the ballot. When I look at the elections, these elections coming up in Maryland, Donald Trump's name isn't on the ballot. So I understand the logic of why you're tying your campaign to an anti-Donald Trump message, but homeboy ain't on the ballot. So what you need to do is identify your Republican potential candidate tie that Republican potential candidate to MAGA, to Donald Trump, and explain the connection. Now you got something, but you still have to explain to me how you're going to make my life better if I vote for you. And don't tell me that simply not voting for a MAGA-tied candidate or a Trump-affiliated candidate is going to do that. How do I know? Because that's what you tried to sell me with Kamala Harris, and it failed then. That's what Hillary Clinton tried to sell us in 2016, and it failed then. Folks, it'll fail again. You don't have to be a political scientist to figure that one out. Trust me, I know from whence I speak. So with that, and in the words of that brilliant, brilliant philosopher, Steve McGarrett from Hawaii Five-0, book it, Dano. I got to thank Greg Palast for joining me today. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. Butch Ware is going to be my guest tomorrow, and got a lot in store with him. Former Green Party candidate for vice president, Butch Ware, is going to join us tomorrow. Thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Leon. And again, I got to thank Greg Palast for that truly unsolicited support, that unsolicited endorsement about the only way that you can really stay in tune with what's happening around the world is to support shows like this. Because let me just also throw in, Donald Trump is doing everything in his power. Now he's threatening Tehran, and which is the capital of Iran. He's threatening Iran with you better unconditionally surrender. Obviously, dude, you don't know nothing about anything, because that one is not going to happen. Again, stay tuned for the new episode tomorrow. Butch Ware is going to be my guest. Please follow, and as Greg said, subscribe, leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. Why? Because it's rhetoric free. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed remainder of your day. Peace.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.